Taken contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listeners' discretion is advised.
Let's take it.
407, what's your condition?
Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson coasts down Marshall County Road number 5 at around 1:40 a.m. on August 27, 1979. Every once in a while, he finds someone speeding down the barren road, or perhaps a car of young lovers canoodling. But in this part of Warren, Minnesota, there isn't all that much to patrol along the road. Without traffic, it's just miles of empty asphalt surrounded by endless fields in either direction. As he nears the intersection of number 5 and Minnesota State 220, a bright light catches his attention for a moment. Dismissing it, Val turns his head to look for traffic along 220. But then, he sees it again. Down the road is a circular bright light moving toward him at a considerable speed. At first, Val assumes he must be seeing a semi-trailer with a headlight out. There's something wrong with it though. The light appears to have edges, and it's far brighter than any commercial headlight he's encountered. In Val's words,
The light was extremely brilliant and painful.
the light comes into full view as Val turns onto Minnesota State 220. Just a mile down the road, it nearly blinds him. There's no way it's a headlight. It must be 8 to 12 inches in diameter, and Val swears it's hovering 3 to 4 feet off of the ground. Val can hardly see as the light races toward him. Is it a truck? Or could it be a farm plane? He doesn't know. Whoever it is, he'll pull them over if he needs to. But it's not a plane or a truck, and there's no one to pull over. The blinding light crashes into Val's patrol car. The headlight blows out, dents form all along the hood. The antenna bend at nearly 90 degrees, and something slams into the lower half of the windshield. It's not until his car hits the pavement that Val realizes he's been hoisted and hurled nearly 800 feet down the road.
407, what's your condition? 407, what's your condition? 407, what's your condition?
You're listening to Blinding Lights, stories number 6 and 7 from Less Taken, Season 3. In this episode, we actually explore 2 different stories. What you just heard is the beginning of the first story called Val, which involves a deputy sheriff encountering what might very well be a UFO in Warren, Minnesota. The second story, 200 Volts, explores an unexplainable account of what happens to a motorcyclist during his travels through Acton, Indiana in June of 1980. A double feature is something different for us, so please let us know what you think of this episode when you're done by leaving us a fair rating and review wherever you're listening. You can also leave reviews at our website, lesstakenpod.com. And be sure to follow us before we follow you on Facebook and Instagram under the handle @lesstakenpod. I'm Sam Humphreys, and this is Less Taken, real-life horror stories from the Midwest. Once again, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy Blinding Lights.
seemed to intercept me, so to speak. It came up right on me, and it was painful. The light was extremely brilliant, but painful.
For over 40 minutes, Val's body droops motionless in his patrol car, a blinding light washing over the hood, the interior, and then exiting out of the back windshield as quickly as it came.
407, what's your condition?
When Val finally comes back around, the first thing he notices is just how bad his eyes hurt. It's as though he's been welding without any sort of shielding. Worse is the sting of peeling back his eyelids, which for all he knows, might have been partially cauterized.
407, what's your condition?
The burnt flesh is minimal, according to his mirror. Given the circumstances, he feels okay otherwise. He's alive, he's breathing just fine. His heart rate is starting to steady.
407, what's your condition?
I don't know. Something attacked my car. I heard the glass breaking, and the lock, the brakes locked up. I mean, I don't know.
Val glances down at the radio clock and then his watch. They both have the same exact time, but for whatever reason, Val swears more time must have passed from when he first saw the brilliant light until now.
Something did strike my vehicle. Something didn't want me there, apparently. I can't put a judgment on it. I really don't know how to classify it. I can't classify it as an attack, because perhaps it was an escape. My eyes were extremely painful, like I'd been subjected to something like arc welder burn or something.
Val Johnson's claims may sound extraordinary. Perhaps something he couldn't process occurred on that road, leading him to jump to such a fantastical conclusion. Perhaps there's even a pop culture tie-in. Maybe Val has aliens on the mind. In 1977, both Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars Episode 4 are smash hits at the box office. There's the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and then the 1979 hit Alien shows up in theaters everywhere just 2 months prior to Val's encounter in Warren, Minnesota. There's a possibility that Val's imagination might have wandered a bit during the wreck, or collision, or whatever it was. But his doctor and optometrists argue that the damage around his eyes tracks with his story. The blinding light part, at least. He must have come into contact with something hot enough to give him mild flash burns around his eyes. Val Johnson doesn't shy away from sharing his story. Not at first, anyhow. Later on, he'll seemingly wish he would have said a little less. He appears on various television newscasts, a few radio shows, and even shows up in writings and publications. It doesn't take all that long for the story of a sheriff deputy encountering a UFO to spread around, and an Illinois-based investigator from the Center of UFO Studies reaches out to Val and the Marshall Police Force, requesting permission to study the wrecked vehicle, as well as the area of the alleged extraterrestrial interaction. Although the investigator doesn't find any proof of residual radioactivity or materials, which may have been expected of a UFO encounter, he's amazed by some of the damage he's seeing. There are skid marks along the blacktop. Val must have really scooted at least 800 feet before he tried to, or finally could, hit the brakes. All the antennae strapped to the roof of his squad car are bent at these impressive right angles. The windshield is shattered, but the point of impact is far too low for it to have been from Val's head. The Center of UFO Studies investigator concludes that what they're seeing appears to have been a close encounter of the second kind. In case you're wondering, a close encounter of the second kind refers to a physical effect alleged or observed in connection with alien life. The first kind is like seeing a UFO within 500 feet of your very eyes. The third kind, which you're probably more familiar with, is human observation of animate beings in association with UFO activity. Val's eyes are treated for the burns and covered with adhesive bandaging for around 8 hours, after which the flesh heals and the burning sensations dissipate. He continues on for years, sharing his story, trying to make sense of what might have taken place on that late August night in Minnesota. It's only natural that he encounters critics along the way. Some argue what he most likely saw was a small, low-flying plane. However, there's as much proof of such a plane as there is of the UFO Val may have seen. There's a vocal minority that suggests the entire situation was a hoax, a desperate attempt to attract some attention, to feel important somehow. The damage to the police car could have been administered by Val, maybe even a buddy or two. If this theory is true, no one has ever owned up to it. Today, you can still see the squad car at the Marshall County Historical Society Museum at 808 East Johnson Avenue in Warren, Minnesota, 56762. And this is not to be confused with the museum of the same exact name in Plymouth, Indiana. As for Val, he eventually gives up talking about the light he saw in an effort to bring his family a stronger sense of normalcy and peace. He finds comfort knowing that his wife, 3 children, and many others believe his story. At bare minimum, they believe Val believes what he thinks he saw that summer night. In his words,
Upon reflection, we've kind of come to the conclusion that perhaps the Creator has made things that we can't readily see or readily identify. And perhaps this is one of the things we've encountered.
I hope you've enjoyed this short tale of a potential UFO encounter from Minnesota. Please stick around after the break for our second story called 200,000 Volts, about a fateful June evening in 1980 for a motorcyclist as he travels through Acton, Indiana. June 1980. A little rain never hurt anyone, or so Robert Davidson thinks as he cruises along I-74 on his motorcycle just outside of Acton, Indiana. When he first sets out on his journey, the weather is fair, albeit somewhat cloudy. As he skirts around Acton Campground on his way out to the interstate, the sun sinks behind a gang of storm cells. Robert rides along, hoping to get off the road before things get worse. At this point, it's only a light drizzle. There's no sign of lightning yet, so Robert decides it's best to pull over, grab a coat from the trunk, and resume his journey. The moment Robert's foot touches the pavement, there's a loud crash, a blinding light, and the sound of his body failing him as over 200,000 volts of electricity course through it. Seconds after it arrives, the lightning passes. Robert's merely a conduit, one through which all the electricity travels, with absolutely no regard for rendering his body useless. Robert tumbles over onto the wet pavement, his motorcycle still running, one arm reaching out, and his consciousness fading. However, this is far from the ending of Robert's story. Thanks for sticking around and listening to the second part of Blinding Lights, the little story we call 200,000 volts. In this tale, we explore the story of a motorcyclist who is struck by lightning. And that's only the beginning. This is a short story about the wrath of Mother Nature, life and death, the paranormal, and perhaps even a miracle. I hope you enjoy. First responders race to the scene of the lightning strike, where they find Robert lying unconscious not too far off from his motorcycle. As the first aid team performs CPR and races to figure out what they can do to save this poor man, a small crowd begins to form. Some of the people are eager to offer assistance, while many of the others just want to look. Firefighter and first aid Kimberly Cobb, as well as her colleague, fellow fighter and first aid Ronald, are close to giving up. The most they can do at this point is load Robert into the ambulance and rush him to the nearest hospital. Kimberly hops into the ambulance and realizes that the engine is turned off. Did she do that? She could swear they left it running. She turns the key. Nothing. She tries again. Still nothing. She flips over several switches, trying to get the equipment, the lights, the radio, anything to work. It's like every circuit blew out at once.
I need to touch him.
Out from the crowd, they hear the sound of a woman calling out.
I need to touch him. I must touch him.
They, along with most of the onlookers, turned their heads to see a woman completely dressed in black. Black dress, black shoes, black hair, everything. She claims,
I can save his life.
Kimberly and Ronald aren't sure what to make of this woman. In Ronald's opinion, there's no way Robert survives, and nothing they do helps matters. So sure, why not, Lady in Black? Give it a try. The woman in black kneels down and begins to pray over Robert's motionless body. From what Kimberly and Ronald can tell, they're just basic prayers. She's simply asking for the Lord's strength and guidance, begging him to bring Robert back from the dead. Then, she raises her black Bible to the sky and begins to shout. No one can make out what she's saying. She speaks in tongues. It's loud, sharp, and sometimes snaky. The words flow from her chapped lips, faster and faster. She slams her Bible against the ground repeatedly. Kimberly and Ronald look at each other in amazement. They're either seeing a madwoman shout at a dead man, or some sort of divine intervention. At this point, the odds of either seem 50-50. All cynicism is swept aside when they notice Robert's chest lift up, ever so slightly. They immediately drop beside Robert and check for a pulse. They'll be damned. He has a heartbeat. It's weak, but there is a pulse. The lady in black stands back up, dusts off her black dress, grins, and then disappears back into the crowd. With the miracle woman out of sight, Kimberly and Ronald return their attention to the ambulance. The lights flash, and the engine hums. Things aren't looking great for Robert. Despite what occurred along I-74 during that stormy evening, he's been in a coma ever since. Technically speaking, there's blood pressure and a heartbeat, but they're both barely there. Even the doctors don't feel great about his odds, stating he'll be lucky to ever come out of his coma. There's a stronger chance that his vitals will one day disappear altogether. But to the doctor's amazement, Robert overcomes the odds. In his words,
I simply woke up one day.
he asks,
What am I doing here?
There's quite the discussion around Robert Davidson. He even scores an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. Out of the gate, many skeptics want to dismiss Robert's claims, suggesting he fabricated the entire story. To their dismay, Robert has, or at least used to have, the medical records and the witnesses to back up his tale. Speaking of witnesses, there's an immense division between them. There's one camp in which people like Kimberly and Ronald swear they saw the lady in black heal Robert. There's a camp to the contrary, in which other witnesses claim there was never a lady in black in the first place. If you assume there really was a lady in black who prayed and spoke in tongues over a lifeless Robert, some would argue that she might have done little more than give him a few more minutes to recover and come back online. While the odds of falling victim to one of the 400 million annual lightning strikes are around 1 in 15,300, they're not completely against you when it comes to being struck by over 200,000 volts of electricity. But obviously not everyone gets their turn. However, according to the CDC, 90% of lightning strike victims survive. So maybe the lady in black, if she truly did exist, did something, or maybe she didn't. What's more astonishing is how well Robert recovered post-coma, as there are often longer-lasting side effects. And who is this lady in black? There's a legend that she's a spirit adrift from the nearby Acton campgrounds. A little background is needed here. Acton Campgrounds is a historical site founded in 1859 by a small group of Methodists. It once served as a meeting place for the Indianapolis district of the Camp Meeting Association of the Methodist Church. It often hosts large gatherings, especially spiritual events. Hence, the stories about a lady in black as a lingering spirit. What's interesting is that the Acton campground burned down on 3 separate occasions. The first time was in 1864 when it served as a hospital for the wounded Civil War troops. It is accidentally set on fire for a second time in 1899, and in 1905, the sparks of a passing train managed to set the entire place ablaze. What's left are the facts. Lightning struck Robert Davidson under unusual circumstances. He fell into a coma and lived to tell the tale. One detail that is up in the air regards the black dress many claim they saw Robert Savior wear on that fateful summer day. It's often reported that you can see an exact match of the dress in some museum nearby Acton, Indiana. We haven't been able to find it yet, but perhaps one of you might know where it's at. Thank you for listening to the first original double feature from Less Taken Season 3, called Blinding Lights. As I mentioned in the intro, this is something new for us, so please let us know what you think of the episode or any of our episodes by giving us a fair rating and review wherever you're listening. Or just give us all the stars. You can also leave reviews at lesstakenpod.com, and while you're there, be sure to check out all of our episodes, sources, notes, media, and merch. We're proud to say that we also offer a new medium roast coffee called Witch's Grave on the site, and you can use the code DOUBLEFEATURE to save $1 when you try it out. There's a bunch of other merch too, and lots of new stuff. Follow us before we follow you on Facebook and Instagram under the handle at lesstakenpod. There you'll find updates, additional media, and more. On our Instagram, we like to share early samples of our episodes. A quick note on our storytelling. While we do our best to stick to the facts, we sometimes take creative liberties to maintain narrative cohesiveness. I'm CM Humphreys, and this is Less Taken, real-life horror stories from the Midwest. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next Wednesday for a preview of story number 8.